The moment everything snapped. The year is 2011, deep inside Pelican Bay State Prison. The Supermax designed to hold California's most hardened and most dangerous inmates. The fluorescent lights hum. The concrete walls breathe cold air. Inside the security housing unit, known as the SHU, every sound echoes like it's trapped in a metal coffin. And this is where we meet Erik Ramirez, a 28-year-old inmate serving time for armed robbery and gang-related assault. By now, he's been in the SHU for 9 straight months. No cellmate, no human touch, no sunlight except for a thin strip that leaks through the vent in the ceiling. His entire world exists inside a concrete room barely bigger than a walk-in closet. And on this day, July 8th, 2011, the day Pelican Bay erupted into one of the largest prison hunger strikes in California history, Erik stands on the edge of something he never thought would happen. He feels the rules breaking him. His vision blurs. His body shakes. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. And now, a correctional officer stands outside his door, staring at him through the small plexiglass window. Ramirez, the guard says, tapping the glass, "You good?" But Erik doesn't answer. He's staring at something else. A message scratched into the wall. One he never noticed before. One he swears wasn't there yesterday. It reads, "The only way to survive Pelican Bay is to stop being who you were." And as he reads it, something snaps. He grabs the edge of his metal bunk. His breathing gets loud. His chest gets tight. He feels the full weight of Pelican Bay's invisible rules pressing into him. The rules that no one writes down, but everyone learns fast. And then everything goes silent. No footsteps. No talking. Not even the sound of the vent. Just silence. And Erik whispering 2 words that send a chill through the concrete. "I'm losing myself." He looks up at the camera, in the corner of his cell. Then he takes a slow step backward. Another, until his back hits the wall. The guard yells his name louder now. But Erik doesn't respond. He just keeps staring at the camera like he isn't inside his own mind anymore. And then he suddenly leaps forward, straight toward the steel door. The camera shakes. The guard reaches for his keys. Alarms begin to blare down the hallway. But before anyone can reach him, Erik slams himself into the steel door with everything he has. And cut, right there, because in order to understand why this moment happened, why Erik reached a breaking point, you first need to understand the harsh, unspoken rules of Pelican Bay, and how every prisoner learns to adapt or shatter. The first lesson, you don't control your life anymore. When Erik Ramsey first arrived at Pelican Bay back in October 2010, he thought he already knew what hard time felt like. He had been locked up before, county jail, a level 3 facility in Kern County, even a stint at Corcoran. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the meaning of the words Pelican Bay State Prison. From the moment the transport bus made its turn toward the tall pines of Crescent City, Erik felt his stomach twist. The prison looked less like a correctional facility and more like a fortress carved into the end of the world. Gray, cold, humid, surrounded by thick forests and silence. It wasn't built to rehabilitate anyone. It was built to crush chaos before it even started. As soon as the bus doors opened, the rules began, not spoken, not written, but understood. No sudden movements. No eye contact with the wrong people. No questioning an order. No assumptions that today will be anything like yesterday. Because inside Pelican Bay, the only predictable thing is unpredictability. To strip out, Erik had barely stepped off the bus before he was met with rule number 1. Your body is not your own. The officers lined everyone against the wall. One by one, inmates were stripped down, inspected, searched, and ordered to follow instructions without hesitation. Erik had been through strip-outs before, but Pelican Bay's version was different. Colder, clinical, like they weren't searching people. They were processing risks. He remembered the officer's voice, flat, emotionless. Arms out, mouth open, lift your tongue. Squat, cough. When it was over, Erik was handed state blues, shackled again, and pushed to the first set of electronically controlled doors. The sound they made when they closed wasn't a normal clang. It was heavier, almost final. The walk to the SHU. Not every inmate goes to the SHU their first day. But Erik did. The officers claimed they had intelligence linking him to gang activity on the yard in his previous prison. Erik didn't argue. In Pelican Bay, arguing is like announcing you want your day to get a lot worse. Handcuffed, ankles chained, Erik shuffled behind escorting officers through long, empty hallways that felt colder the deeper you went. Every turn smelled like disinfectant and steel. Every door looked identical. And every step confirmed he was no longer just doing time. He was entering a system within a system, a place where even the definition of time changes. The cell that teaches you who's in control. When he reached his SHU cell, the officer unlocked the door, motioned for him to step inside, and then shut it behind him. And just like that, rule number 2 hit him. You don't control space. Space controls you. The SHU cell was barely 8 feet wide, with a concrete bunk, a steel desk welded to the wall, and a small, frosted window that didn't show anything except a sheet of gray brightness. The air felt colder inside. Not just physically, emotionally. There was no TV unless you earned one. No phone calls unless approved. No yard unless scheduled. No noise except the ones you created. For the first time, Erik felt Pelican Bay studying him more than he was studying it. He put his hand on the wall. It vibrated from the impact of someone in another cell pounding, either out of frustration or communication. The first night, reality sets in. That first night, Erik lay on the concrete bunk staring at the ceiling. The lights never fully go out in the SHU. They stay dim, but present enough to remind you someone is watching at all times. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He barely moved, because that was the moment rule number 3 became clear. Routine is not yours to create. It's yours to accept. At exactly 5 a.m., a loudspeaker crackled to life. Stand by for food trays. The sound echoed down the tier. A slot opened. A tray slid in. Then the slot slammed shut. No face. No voice. Just a hand that delivered food and disappeared. Erik stared at the tray. Watery oatmeal, a piece of bread, and something he couldn't identify. It wasn't about the food. It was about the message. You eat when we say. You move when we allow. You exist inside the limits we set. Adapting to invisible rules. Over the next few days, Erik began to observe patterns. If another inmate tapped a certain rhythm on the wall, it meant COs on the tier. If the lights flickered longer than usual, it meant a cell extraction was happening nearby. If you heard total silence for too long, something bad was about to happen. These weren't the official rules. These were the survival rules, the ones Pelican Bay inmates passed down silently, cell to cell, through vibrations in concrete and whispers through vents. And Erik slowly began adjusting to them. But even with small adaptations, prison still had one more lesson waiting. The rule that breaks everyone. Late one night, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., Erik woke to the sound of metal scraping down the hallway. He knew this sound. Everyone did. It was a restraint chair. And Pelican Bay inmates understand rule number 4 very quickly. If the prison thinks you're not following the program, it will remind you of your place. The scraping sound moved closer, then closer, until Erik heard officers yelling down the tier. Stop resisting. Get him down. Leg secured. A man screamed. Then something slammed against metal. Then silence. Then the chair scraping again. As it moved past Erik's cell, he heard the restrained inmate whisper something through clenched teeth. You can't beat the rules. You can only learn them. That sentence would stick with Erik, because he didn't know it yet. But Pelican Bay was preparing to teach him a rule far harsher than anything he had learned so far. And that rule would lead straight back to the moment in the hook. The moment he slammed himself into the steel door. The rule that changes your mind before your body. The first week inside, the SHU taught Erik how to move, when to eat, and when to stay silent. But it wasn't until his second week that he learned the rule that breaks more Pelican Bay inmates than any extraction team, any riot squad, or any cold meal ever could. The rule that targets your mind. The one that works quietly, patiently, like water wearing downstone. The rule of isolation. Most prisons in America punish you by taking away privileges. Pelican Bay punishes you by taking away people. Inside the SHU, human contact becomes something you measure in seconds. A quick glimpse of a CO walking past. A muffled cough from another cell. A whisper through a vent. That's it. No cellmates. No conversations. No touching your family during visits. Everything is through glass. Everything is distant. And for the first time since he got locked up, Erik realized how loud silence can actually be. It's the kind of silence that feels like it has weight, the kind that sits on your chest and pushes deeper every day. The first 72 hours of mental breakdown. Pelican Bay's officers don't threaten you with violence. They don't need to. SHU isolation does the work for them. By day 3 in the SHU, Erik started hearing faint taps he couldn't identify. Not the usual communication taps. These were random, irregular, almost like someone was knocking from inside the walls. At night, the silence grew louder. He tried closing his eyes, but the darkness made the room feel even smaller. He opened them again, staring at the dim light that never completely shut off. He felt his heartbeat in his ears. He counted his breaths, trying to anchor himself. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Then he'd start over. The SHU changes your sleep first, then your appetite, then your sense of time, then your sense of self. Every Pelican Bay inmate knows this. They whisper it through vents like a warning. Don't let your thoughts talk too loud, because in here, they start talking back. The strange message in the concrete. One afternoon, maybe around 2 p.m., though time in the SHU isn't real time, Erik noticed something strange on the back wall of the cell. It wasn't paint. It wasn't dirt. It was a set of small scratches. He leaned closer. They formed letters, words, a sentence. The only way to survive Pelican Bay is to stop being who you were. He didn't understand it at first. Why would anyone carve that? What did it mean? He touched the scratches with his fingers. They were deep, aggressive. Someone had made them with intention, desperation. For the next few days, Erik kept glancing at the message. Every morning, every night. And that's when he learned the SHU's most dangerous rule. If you don't decide who you're going to be here, Pelican Bay will decide for you. The hunger strike begins. On July 1st, 2011, something bigger began brewing inside Pelican Bay. Something historic. The Pelican Bay hunger strike. Led by inmates protesting long-term isolation, lack of sunlight, and conditions inside the SHU. Word traveled cell to cell through whispers, notes, and coded taps. Erik first learned about the strike when a slip of paper slid under his door. It came from an inmate several cells down, someone known simply as Lopez, a Mexican mafia associate who had survived in the SHU for over 12 years. Lopez's note was short. No food until they hear us. Stay strong. Erik wasn't a leader, wasn't a shot caller, wasn't even heavily involved in gang politics anymore. But he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt since before the SHU started changing him. A sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. He pushed the tray away the next morning. The officer didn't react. They had been told to expect this. But the hunger, that was real. By day 2, his stomach cramped. By day 3, he felt lightheaded. By day 4, walking to the shower in restraints felt like wading through water. And the entire time, that scratched message in the concrete kept whispering at him like a ghost. Stop being who you were. The SHU's response. When hunger strikes happen, Pelican Bay doesn't beg anyone to eat. They simply observe. Every few hours, officers walk down the tier, shining lights through the windows. Ramirez still refusing? Yes. Noted. They checked vitals. They watched behavior. They rarely spoke. But on the evening of July 6th, something changed. A captain, 2 lieutenants, and 6 COs walked down the tier together, slow, deliberate, scanning every cell. Their boots echoed like thunder. They stopped at the cell of an older inmate named Wallace Green, someone who had been locked in the SHU for nearly 14 years straight. Green, the captain called out, "Step forward." Green didn't move. The captain repeated himself. Still nothing. That's when the guards unlocked the door. Erik couldn't see inside, but he could hear everything. The command, the struggle, the shouting, then the ultimate SHU sound, the thud of a body hitting concrete. Minutes later, officers dragged Green past Erik's cell, cuffed, limp, and breathing heavy. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't fighting. He just looked empty. When their eyes met for a second, Green said something in a broken whisper. "Don't let this place hollow you out." And just like that, he was gone. The night the SHU got into Erik's head, that night, the silence felt different. Heavier, more alive. Erik lay on his bunk staring at the scratch message again. He felt something tight in his chest and something louder than usual in his mind. He began quietly repeating to himself, "I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." But each time he said it, he believed it less. Then, around what he guessed was 3 a.m., Erik saw something that froze him, a shadow on the wall. But it wasn't from the hallway. It wasn't from a guard. It wasn't from anything that made sense. It moved slowly, stretching across the wall like someone standing just outside of his vision. Erik sat up, blinked, rubbed his eyes. The shadow didn't move with him, didn't shift, didn't behave like a normal shadow. It just hovered. He squeezed his eyes shut and whispered, "You're imagining it. It's the SHU. It's the isolation. You're imagining it." When he opened his eyes again, the shadow was gone. But something far worse remained. The belief that his mind was no longer fully his own. The moment before the hook. By July 8th, 2011, Erik was in full starvation mode. His hands shook. His vision blurred. Every sound felt too sharp. The combination of hunger, isolation, sleep deprivation, and fear made him feel like he was becoming someone he didn't recognize. Or maybe someone he'd been avoiding. And on that day, when things inside Pelican Bay reached their boiling point, Erik finally understood the scratch message. To survive the SHU, you don't adapt your body. You adapt your identity. Because your old self cannot live here. And that understanding is what led him straight into the moment from the hook. The moment he whispered, "I'm losing myself," and then ran full speed toward the steel door. But that moment wasn't the breaking point. It was only the doorway to it. Asterisk, asterisk. When the mind breaks, the rules take over. The morning after Erik slammed himself into the steel door. The moment from the hook that left officers yelling, alarms blaring, and his body shaking. Pelican Bay reacted exactly the way Pelican Bay was designed to react. Quietly, coldly, clinically. There was no screaming, no harsh threats, no dramatic confrontation. Because here inside the SHU, the prison doesn't raise its voice. It just tightens its grip, the quiet after the impact. When Erik regained full awareness, he was sitting on the floor of his cell, leaned against the wall. A faint bruise throbbed across his shoulder and jaw. His breathing was slow but shaky. His mind was cloudy, but one thing came through clearly. He had not been himself. The guard who tapped on a window earlier was replaced by someone else, a middle-aged officer named C.O. Jenkins, someone known for being strict but not cruel. Jenkins opened the food port and set a small paper cup of water inside. He didn't speak for almost 10 seconds. Then he said something strange. "You're not the first to hit the door, but you don't want to be the next." He closed the slot and walked away. That was it. That was his entire response. And somehow, those words unsettled Erik more than if he'd been yelled at. The rule no one talks about. Later that day, a prison psychologist came to Erik's cell. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Hart, a soft-spoken woman with gray hair and glasses that seemed too delicate for a place built of steel. She didn't step inside the cell. No one does. She stood outside, clipboard in hand, speaking to the door like a therapist trapped on the other side of a fish tank. "Erik," she said gently, "I heard there was an incident this morning." He swallowed hard. "It was nothing," he muttered. Hart didn't argue. She didn't lecture. She didn't ask why. Instead, she asked something far more dangerous inside Pelican Bay. "When was the last time you slept? Real sleep?" He didn't answer. She nodded. "That's what I thought." After a moment, she wrote something down and said quietly, "There's a rule here that men don't talk about, but you need to hear it. The SHU doesn't break your body first. It breaks your rhythm." He frowned. "What rhythm?" "Your brain's natural one," she replied. "Sleep, hunger, routine, connection. Once those get disrupted long enough, your thoughts stop moving in straight lines." She paused. "You've begun experiencing that, haven't you?" Erik looked away, because she was right, and that terrified him. The cell that shrinks around you. That night, the SHU felt smaller. The air felt heavier, and the silence felt sharper. Erik lay in bed staring at the faint light on the ceiling, fighting his own thoughts like they were separate from him. He tried counting cracks in the wall. He tried breathing exercises he remembered from juvenile hall. He even tried singing a line from a song he could barely recall. Nothing worked. The walls felt like they were leaning inward. The ceiling felt lower. The air felt thinner. This wasn't panic. This was something worse. This was cognitive compression, a phrase older SHU inmates use to describe the moment your thoughts tighten into a funnel and you can't think outside the shape it creates. The scratch message on the wall. "The only way to survive Pelican Bay is to stop being who you were," felt less like a warning and more like a prophecy. And that's when the hallucinations began again. The shadow returns. Around what he guessed was 2 a.m., the room darkened in a way that didn't make logical sense. It wasn't that the light went out. Pelican Bay's SHU lights never fully go out. But something changed. A shape appeared on the back wall. A dark shape. A shape that didn't belong to anything inside his cell. It moved slowly like someone was standing just outside his field of vision. Erik's heart slammed in his chest. He blinked hard, and the shape vanished. He exhaled shakily, relieved for a moment, but then saw something far worse. A new line carved into the concrete, below the first message, carved deeper than before. Fresher, the line read, "The old you isn't coming back." Erik jumped back, trembling so hard his teeth clicked. This wasn't there before. He was certain of it, but who carved it? When? How? A disturbing possibility crawled into his mind. What if he carved it and didn't remember? He pressed against the opposite wall, gripping his own wrist just to feel something real. The SHU wasn't just wearing him down. It was rewriting him. The prison's response to broken minds. At sunrise, officers came for Erik. He heard the muffled order through the steel. "Ramirez, step to the back of your cell. Hands visible." He complied. The door opened. 2 COs cuffed him. One held his arm. Another held his shoulder. "Where am I going?" Erik asked. No one answered. They walked him through the tier, down a hallway, around a corner, and into a small room with a metal bench bolted to the floor. A red sign hung above the door. Crisis Stabilization Unit, CSU. This was where inmates went when the SHU started pulling their minds apart. A place for the ones who talked to walls. The ones who stopped talking at all. The ones who hurt themselves. The ones who hurt others. The ones who stared into the camera and whispered things no one wanted to hear. "Have a seat," the officer said. Erik sat. A different psychologist entered, a man in his 40s with a shaved head and a calm voice. "Mr. Ramirez," he said, sitting across from him, "you're here because your actions this morning suggest you may be experiencing acute psychological distress." "No," Erik snapped. "I just slipped." The psychologist raised an eyebrow. "You slipped into the steel door at full speed?" Erik clenched his jaw and looked away. The psychologist wrote something down. "Let me explain something to you, Erik. There's a term we use for SHU reactions. It's called environmental deprivation syndrome. It happens when the brain isn't getting enough stimulation. No color, no sound, no faces, no sunlight, no touch. After a while, the brain starts creating its own stimulation. Shadows, voices, messages, patterns." The psychologist leaned forward. "If you think you're immune, you're wrong." Erik's pulse spiked. "And if you think you're the first to carve messages you can't remember carving." He paused. "You're also wrong." Erik froze. So it was possible, maybe even likely. The psychologist continued. We monitor things here more than you think. Sleep hours, eye movement, how long you stare at the same point on the wall, what you whisper at night. Everything is recorded. He tapped his folder. And you're slipping faster than average. The rule that pulls you back into line. After the evaluation, they escorted Erik back to his cell. He expected punishment. He expected more isolation. Instead, he found something waiting on his bunk. A book, a single paperback, tatty around the edges. It was The Art of War by Sun Tzu. On the first page, someone had written a handwritten note. Control your mind before this place controls it for you. LG, Lopez Gonzalez. The same Lopez who helped organize the hunger strike. But how did the book get here? And more importantly, how did Lopez know Erik needed it? He opened the book slowly. The first sentence hit him harder than he expected. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. It felt like the first real lifeline he'd received since entering the SHU. For the next 3 days, Erik read obsessively. Not for entertainment, not for education, for survival. The move that isn't a move, but a warning. When the officer said, Ramirez, you're being moved, the hallway outside Erik's cell fell into a strange kind of silence. Not empty silence, observing silence. The kind that meant every inmate on the tier knew something unusual was about to happen. SHU inmates rarely get moved. Transfers are uncommon. Random cell changes are even rarer. In Pelican Bay, a move almost always means one thing. The system wants to reset you, to disrupt your mental equilibrium, to erase the small routine you built, to break whatever fragile stability you managed to develop. And for the first time in weeks, Erik felt a different kind of fear. Not the fear of what he was becoming, but the fear of what Pelican Bay was about to do to him. The escort. 2 officers cuffed him, one at each arm. A third stood behind him, hand ready on the pepper spray canister clipped to his vest. No one said a word as they led him out of the cell, down the tier, past the other inmates, past the cameras, past the spots on the floor where previous struggles had once taken place. As he walked, he could feel the eyes of other prisoners watching him through the narrow cell windows, not out of concern, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. They'd seen this before. A move wasn't punishment. It was a recalibration. Correctional control at its highest level. The walk through the gray maze. The SHU hallways were identical, long, narrow tunnels painted in washed-out gray, lit with humming fluorescent tubes that flickered every few seconds. Every turn looked the same. Every door felt like déjà vu. But the deeper they walked, the colder the air became. This wasn't a normal SHU tier. This was deeper, quieter, colder, and then a door Erik had never noticed before. Heavy, steel, reinforced. Above it was a red sign. Restricted unit. Authorized entry only. The officer knocked twice. The door buzzed, and they entered the room no one talks about. Inside the restricted unit, the air felt thicker. There were fewer cells, more cameras, and a kind of stillness that felt unnatural. It wasn't like the regular SHU, where men tapped messages through concrete. This hall was silent, completely silent. A silence that didn't feel like isolation. A silence that felt like containment. The officers led Erik to a cell at the end of the hallway. Cell R107. The door opened. Step inside, the officer said. Erik obeyed. The door shut behind him with a metallic thud that echoed through his bones. And that's when he realized something disturbing. This cell was different. No window slit. No desk. No metal shelf. Just a concrete bunk, a drain in the floor, and a vent at the top of the wall. It wasn't a disciplinary cell. It wasn't a suicide cell. It was something else. A chamber for recalibration. A place designed to strip the mind of the patterns it began rebuilding. The official purpose. From the hallway, a voice spoke through the intercom. Ramirez, this is Lieutenant Avery. Avery was known to everyone in the SHU. Not for cruelty. Not for kindness. For being calculating. We're placing you here temporarily. not as punishment, but for observation. Observation. The word hit like a punch. Why? Erik asked. There was a short pause. Your behavior over the past week indicates instability, running into the cell door, reduced sleep patterns, hallucinations, carvings on the wall. We cannot allow an inmate to deteriorate beyond a recoverable point. Erik felt his pulse quicken. So you think I'm losing it? He said quietly. Avery responded with clinical bluntness. We think you're transitioning. Into what? Erik whispered. Avery didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, adaptation can look like deterioration. Our job is to make sure it becomes one and not the other. The intercom clicked off. Silence again. The purpose of the restricted unit. Hours passed. At least Erik assumed they were hours. The light stayed on the whole time. No tray slot opened. No water was offered. No voices came through the vent. This cell wasn't to punish him physically. It was to starve his senses even further, to force mental clarity, or force mental collapse. Whichever came first. Erik sat on the bunk. His hands shook. His breathing quickened. His mind raced. He whispered to himself, You're not breaking. You're adapting. But even he didn't fully believe it. The first test, the air shift, late into the night, or maybe early in the morning, the temperature in the cell dropped. Not a natural cold, a mechanical cold, the kind that seeped into bones and joints. Erik rubbed his arms. His fingers felt stiff. His breath became visible. Then 10 minutes later, the heat kicked on. Sudden, intense, oppressive. Sweat formed across his forehead. Then the heat shut off again, plunging the cell back into cold. This continued in cycles. Cold, heat, cold, heat. Not extreme enough to cause harm, just extreme enough to disrupt the nervous system. Erik realized what they were doing, resetting his internal clock, resetting his emotional rhythm, resetting his thoughts, breaking the pattern he was beginning to build with the book, and forcing a new pattern upon him, a prison-imposed identity shift. The second test, the sound. Then came the next layer, a faint beep, then another, then a mechanical hum. At first, it was barely noticeable. A sound he thought came from the vent. But after an hour, it grew louder, consistent, relentless. A hum that vibrated across the concrete. Too low to ignore, too soft to identify. A sound that didn't hurt the ears, but bothered the mind. Psychologists call it low-frequency sonic pressure. Inmates call it the thought scraper. A sound engineered not to torture, but to nudge. To tilt the mind slightly off-center, to weaken resistance just enough to make the next stage hit harder. Erik pressed his hands against his ears. The sound vibrated inside his skull. He slid to the floor, leaning against the wall, shaking his head as if trying to clear water from his ears. And still, the sound continued. For hours, maybe longer, the point of breaking or bending. By the time the sound stopped, Erik had lost all sense of time. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Days felt like one long moment. His mind felt stretched thin, not broken, but close. And that's when the door finally opened. A single officer stepped inside. Ramirez, he said calmly, stand up. Erik struggled to his feet. The officer studied him for a long moment, not with malice, not with kindness, but with a detached, professional curiosity. You came closer than most, the officer said, but you didn't crack. That's good. He paused. It means you're ready for the next phase. Erik blinked. The next phase? He repeated. The officer nodded. You're being returned to your regular SHU cell, but your tier is different now. Different how? The officer held a straight face. You're going to D-Pod. Erik's stomach dropped. D-Pod wasn't just any tier. It was a tier where long-term SHU inmates, the ones with 10, 15, 20 years inside, were held. Men who didn't just adapt to Pelican Bay's rules. Men who became the rules. The officer stepped aside. Let's go. Erik walked out of the restricted unit slowly, knowing two things. He passed the test. But Pelican Bay wasn't done with him. In fact, it was just beginning. D-Pod, where survival has a different meaning. The escort to D-Pod felt different from any other walk Erik had taken inside Pelican Bay. The officers weren't tense, they weren't aggressive, and they weren't rushed. Instead, they moved with the calm confidence of men who knew exactly how this was going to unfold. They weren't escorting him to chaos. They were escorting him to order, an order created not by the prison, but by the men who survived it. The deeper they walked, the warmer the air became. Not physically warm, energetically warm. Something was alive in this part of the SHU, and Erik could feel it. Arriving at D-Pod, the door buzzed open and Erik stepped inside. Immediately, he sensed the difference. Regular SHU units felt like pressure chambers, cold, sterile, designed for isolation. But D-Pod felt still like the eye of a hurricane. Every inmate here was serving extremely long SHU terms. Some had been in these cells since the late 1990s. Men who had been cut off from the world so long that Pelican Bay became their universe. And these weren't random offenders. These were the architects of survival. Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, unaligned veterans with 20-year bids under isolation. The men in D-Pod didn't just adapt to Pelican Bay's rules. They shaped them. And now, Erik was about to learn their version of survival, the first contact. When the officers left, the hallway fell silent, but not the kind of silence that crushes the mind. This silence was aware. Then, from 2 cells down, a voice spoke. Ramirez. It wasn't a question. It wasn't friendly. Just a statement. Erik turned toward the voice. It came from a cell belonging to an older inmate named Marcus Redline Telfer, a Black Guerrilla Family elder rumored to have survived 19 years straight in the SHU without once breaking mentally. No hallucinations. No self-harm. No door-slamming episodes. Just quiet discipline. How do you know my name? Erik asked. Redline laughed softly. They got files on all of us, hermano. But out here, we learn people by the sound they make in the world. Erik swallowed. And what sound do you think I make? For the first time in weeks, there was a hint of warmth. You make the sound of someone who didn't break, but almost did. That makes you interesting. Is that a good thing? Erik asked. Depends, Redline said. Do you want to survive? Or do you want to stay who you were? That question cut deeper than any SHU tactic, because Erik knew the truth. The old him couldn't survive this place. And the new him, the version Pelican Bay was manufacturing, terrified him. The lesson of D-Pod. Over the next 2 days, Erik experienced a version of the SHU he didn't think was possible. There was no talking through doors. That wasn't allowed. But communication still flowed through the vents, through taps, through coded patterns of walking to the shower. D-Pod had a system, a rhythm, a philosophy. Every man here followed the same unspoken rule. In the SHU, your mind is your knife. Keep it sharp or it turns on you. Redline taught him through the vent. You think the SHU breaks strong men? No, it breaks unfocused men. A strong mind with no direction is just a spinning blade pointed inward. Lopez Gonzalez, organizer of the hunger strike, sent another message through the pipe system. Purpose keeps you alive. Noise kills you. Find something to build inside yourself, or this place will build something ugly for you. Even inmates Erik never spoke to directly influence him. A tapping pattern at 6 a.m., another pattern at noon, a long silence at 5 p.m. that meant everyone in the pod was meditating or focusing. It was like entering a monastery made of concrete and iron, dark, silent, and extremely disciplined. And slowly, Erik began to realize he wasn't placed in D-Pod as punishment. He was placed there because the prison needed to redirect him before he broke completely. The truth about the scratched message. On his 3rd night in D-Pod, Erik stared at the wall again, thinking about the message in his old cell. The only way to survive Pelican Bay is to stop being who you were. He whispered into the vent. Redline, what if I'm becoming someone I don't want to be? There was a long pause. Then Redline answered. You think any of us want to become who we are now? You think a man chooses a version of himself that survives this place. He took a breath. You're not losing yourself, Ramirez. You're shedding the version of you that wasn't built for this level of war. War, Erik said quietly. Yes, Redline replied, but not the kind you fought on the streets. This is a war against silence, time, and the parts of your mind that don't want you to exist anymore. Another pause. Here's the truth you're scared to admit. You're adapting. And in Pelican Bay, adaptation is the only kind of freedom we get. For the first time, Erik didn't argue. He didn't panic. He simply accepted the truth. The SHU was changing him. But he had a choice in how it changed him. The final shift. On the morning of his 25th day in the SHU, officers opened Erik's door. He expected another move, another test, another interrogation. Instead, the officer simply said, Ramirez, you're cleared. Cleared for what? Erik asked cautiously. The officer looked him in the eye. For stability. That word hit harder than any blow. He wasn't being moved. He wasn't being transferred. He wasn't being punished. He was being acknowledged. He had survived. The officer stepped back and spoke calmly. Welcome to the part of Pelican Bay where men stop breaking and start becoming. And for the first time since he arrived at Pelican Bay, something inside Erik finally clicked. He understood the scratch message. He understood the tests. He understood DePod. And he understood why he was still standing when so many others collapsed. He didn't lose himself. He transformed himself. And that's what Pelican Bay's harsh rules require. The truth they never tell you about Pelican Bay. Pelican Bay State Prison isn't just a place where rules are enforced. It's a place where rules rewrite the people trapped inside them. Some men break. Some men bend. Some men disappear inside themselves. But others, the rare ones, find a way to adapt without losing the core of who they are. Erik didn't survive the SHU because he was the toughest. He didn't survive because he was the strongest. He survived because he learned the truth that every long-term Pelican Bay inmate eventually faces. You can't fight the rules. You can only learn how to live inside them without letting them hollow you out. Inside those cold walls, men build routines out of nothing. They build identity out of silence. They build purpose out of concrete. And if they're lucky, if they're disciplined, focused, and painfully honest with themselves, they find a version of survival that goes deeper than strength. A survival of the mind, a survival of identity, a survival of self. Because in Pelican Bay, endurance is not about who you were. It's about who you become when everything else is stripped away. And for Erik Ramirez, that transformation wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning.